I apologize for putting my multi-video listeners through similar arguments again. Some of you in every nation must compose your critical constitutional cases for your judges, who won't be watching all these videos, and who will give each lawyer only one equal shot. Adapt American framers' imperatives to your charter and nation. In every nation on earth, a lawyer for the people may present similar, if more expertly written arguments in a federal court for enforcement, not abrogation, of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and replacement of every private source of campaign cash, bribing politicians with solely public campaign funds for equal campaigning time. And return of the people's constitutional war-making authority stolen by corrupt executives mistakenly entrusted to only enforce legislators' choice and direction that only Congress may declare people's wars of self-defense against aggressor enemies. Presidents no longer allowed to launch unconstitutional wars of personal, profitable aggression all by their tyrannical selves. The following arguments are based on my American Constitution, but they also apply to 90% of all human beings' concepts of human rights, even if your constitutions are worded differently. But any judge-enforced founding legal document with the words equal and treaty in it likely proves each properly argued case for the people. And your country must uphold its laws first. Mine is only going to be dragged to decency later by your example and pressure, kicking and screaming. I've already played pretend legal eagle at 1,000 bored dinner tables, so if you'll pour the coffee and sit down, I'll try to do better. Thank your honors for hearing the people's cases for enforcing our Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty that our corrupted executives abrogate, and instituting public campaign finance that our corrupted legislatures refuse to consider. A republic is defined as a government in which supreme power resides in a body of citizens entitled to vote, and is exercised by elected officers and representatives responsible to them, not bribing fat cats, I might add, and governing according to law, not just the biggest donors. A republic promised by many constitutions is also a community of beings that resembles in organization a political republic, and is characterized by a general equality among members, necessarily excluding permission, I might add, for the private rich to buy unequal political power to force our treasury to waste, war, and debt for their profit and our harm. Equal citizens' votes necessarily follow their equal chances to evaluate competing candidates' platforms. Competition to collect gifts then spent on buying more propaganda time than poorer candidates can afford gives a minority disproportionate power to buy votes until achieving a corrupted majority and election victory wholly attained with unequal persuasion time of debate. The ultimate anti-democratic marketing gospel. paying candidates to trumpet your views or interests to many voters who hopefully cannot buy so much competing influence upon you is vote buying, whether by one's donated $10 or a political action committee's corporate 10 million. In a true republic, you may only attempt to directly persuade other voters to your opinions and candidates, but not pay professional propagandists to pummel other voters hours longer than different advocacy customers can pay to change minds like yours. Such commercialized mind bending renders thoughts and choices no longer ours, now unduly influenced by the highest bidder and spender. Representatives voted in by a thus twisted electorate then represent only the most prosperous, especially arms and other corporations buying contracts paid from our money 100 or 1,000 times more than their bribes, often amassing the very arsenals that drive our wars and kill our treasured sons and daughters. Government counsel, not to mention our own highest court's tragic errors, will tell you that such purchase of theft and murder is constitutional free speech. Actually, pay to play campaigns destroy our very ability and freedom to independently speak and think. And the no longer public servants abandon their equal duty to all of us, becoming instead private employees and lackeys, ignoring their war's abuse of all for fat campaign kitties they have voted to keep in retirement, during which they are often hired by the very companies that cashed in. Now using these ultimate insiders to guide their fat lips back for more decades of latching on to the public tit. An addendum to our conflict of interest lawsuit that our stinking legislatures are too conflicted to be interested in blocks any employee of a government contract holder from ever taking any government job to then exercise power to further reward his or her real employer, and forbids any government employee from ever working for any company they helped while in office. Giant libraries, your honors, are full of the history of such corruption driving the enormous percentage of our national budgets we're 18 trillion in debt for, and 100% of 60 years of unnecessary, aggressive American wars killing 62,000 of our young people. It is not coincidence that flouting our constitutional right of Congress to authorize war by declaration and bald-faced lies to obtain most wars undeclared permission were the illegal mechanisms never addressed by any federal court used to undemocratically force the American people to war for private profit. So brace yourselves for our next lawsuit. Our current suits, however, are powerful remedies. Obeying our treaty and ending bribery and other conflicts of interest destroys the worst weapons and cuts off the dirty money, honey. Only prohibiting gifts to candidates, always used to favor generous constituents over all others, obviously destroying everyone else's democratic, republican, equal political rights. The parties chose those names to fool you. Only outlawing all campaign contributions would allow our Constitution's promised supreme equal power to all citizens by entitling us to hear equal competition with necessary regulation of media time for each candidate's proposals for their public service plans. Every voter's choice then would be his or hers alone, never again to be twisted and captured by the richest, most persistent, gold-diggingest propagandists. Elected officers and representatives, and also the entire government of bureaucrats and regulators, formerly manipulated by the elected or appointed servants of the commercial private bribers and string pullers, would become really, not just theoretically, responsible to all of us equally, attending to a true majority plus the also remaining minority of still deserving constituents, no longer serving either groups of voters manipulated and cobbled together by corrupt pressure, or often frankly delivering huge chunks of our treasury and twisting regulations to benefit a tiny group or groups of fat cats. The bribery system ensures that leaders will govern against our needs to please minority oligarchs, virtually never passing or enforcing equality-designed Republican democratic laws. Representative democracy is defined as a form of government in which supreme power is vested in the people and exercised by them indirectly through a system of representation and delegated authority in which the people choose their officials and representatives at periodically held free elections. The very first one to be held in this nation after you outlaw political bribery, of course. I'd like to read to you a very short passage. This is the preamble, the overarching goals and objectives of the Constitution of the United States. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Maybe we should rewrite our Constitution to express its modern corporate evolution. Rather than actually uphold, defend, or even intelligently interpret that original Constitution, as we beg of you to get started doing now, Your Honors, we, the people of the United States, have so far failed to form a more perfect union, have not established electoral, government, or military justice, nor ensured the domestic tranquility of private and public sectors minding each other's business. We destroy our common defense by providing instead a bizarre offense of world war, and secure the blessings of liberty for none but fat cats, paying off lackey pals to often impoverish and kill many of us, especially our posterity we doom to depression and death. We initially ordained, but never actually established this Constitution for the United States of America or anybody in it, except for the big dogs. So now, judges, with your decisions to enforce our legally pledged duty to our non-nuclear non-proliferation treaty, and also to outlaw political bribery, you will finally allow us to form a more perfect union than any in our history. We'll establish electoral, governmental, and military justice, and ensure that a business of war will never again break millions of bodies, hearts, and wallets, gloriously enhancing domestic tranquility. You will restore our common defense lost with our innocence at Hiroshima. You'll promote our general, not just corporate, welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to all of ourselves and our posterity. Blessings which Congress and presidents gave instead only to themselves and their commercial, parasite, predator cronies. Decide for the people, not those corrupt government shysters, and you will finally establish this Constitution for a huge bunch of family love freaks, same as our colonial forebears who fought for and wrote the damn thing. All state and national laws that permit or arrange gifts to politicians and lack of law that prohibits private payments to them, all meant to improperly and unjustly influence public servants' preparation or work, violate every word of our Constitution's preamble, its purpose and goals of law and benefit to us, and several other articles I will detail. Article 1, Section 4. The manner of holding elections may be prescribed by each state or Congress. We contend that no American or representative of us may prescribe undemocratic, oligarchic, conflict of private with public interest gifts to political candidates or officials, almost always used to overwhelm unconnected opponents with election-stealing publicity power that less private dollar-powered opposition cannot compete with. Being a commercially competitive system or manner of holding the campaign phase of elections, also extending private businesses' capture of leaders and our treasury throughout their tenure and even subsequent private careers. These gifts ensure that each and every elected person will, to some or usually massive degree, refuse to uphold their oath of office to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, every word of which rejects sacrificing equal benefits for special individual favors. Buying extra electoral publicity power to popularize your chosen candidate the public might reject if debate time were equal, or buying a leader to help you at another's expense, not to mention all of our expense, both break the Constitution's promise to grant Republican supreme power fully and equally to all the people. Begin to keep that promise from now on, your honors, by denying special favor, power, and rights to abuse us to every would-be tyrant and greedy, dangerous, violent punk. It is Article 3, Section 4 that guarantees every state a Republican form of government. I hope I recall the definition of Republican. Supreme power residing in a body of citizens entitled to vote, but only in already rigged elections. Sadly, for many decades, we've made my crappy little joke the truth. A republic's people power is to be exercised by elected officers and representatives responsible to them and governing by law. So what's the problem if they decide to be responsible instead, a la quid pro quo, to pay off artists and just change, create, or ignore laws, all for their fat cronies' benefit? Never mind, just get yours and screw every other American who pays you a perfectly fine salary to serve them. Only a manner of election preserving, protecting, and defending us, body of citizens, allows us to freely vote without our intellectual twisting and capture when private donors buy and corrupt certain candidates with an overage of propaganda time. Only adjusting campaign opportunity from unequal to equal time, funded by taxpayers, will prevent private interests from vanquishing the politicians' commitment to apportion government programs to use our tax money equally for all citizens' needed care as honestly judged by their compassion for our needs. No longer shedding sweat, tears, and taxes primarily to them who butters your bread. Or shall we continue diverting most of our general funds, not to mention borrowing to the moon, to benefit those bribing companies, while giving short shrift to the safety, welfare, and solvency of our other 1/3 of a billion citizens? Sure, why not? The riches and power addicts sucking us dry and dead can't say no. So why should we pause who clean up too with this scam? And God help us if you judges are getting something under the table too. Founders assumed that campaigners heading from town to town on horseback, holding equal time debates, encouraged to write competing articles of similar length in the few well-distributed periodicals, could not any one unfairly dominate media. A tradition of business bribing officials to steal our taxes for war and other privately profitable public endeavors to benefit fat cats and hurt the rest of us had not yet developed in the colonies. To the framers, most tyranny was in the form of the British oppression that inspired our revolt. You didn't by any chance forget that the despots we overthrew also did nothing but grab all the rights and the riches for the royals. So our founders did not specifically forbid certain detailed abuses they certainly would have if beset by them. Our Constitution nevertheless requires voter and citizen equality, the polar opposite of any allowance of private influence sabotaging much public interest in favor of certain private citizens successfully conspiring for advantage in government treatment, menacing merchandising, and public assistance. Of course, the people's appeals to you are no less Americans' demands or revolts, if peaceful, against tyrannical oppression. To recover our lives, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And also necessarily a revised legal design for our equality. God-given but human stolen rights and self-rule. Does this remind your honors of every purpose of our original revolution, which we have been busy destroying the achievements and rights of ever since? Of course, the people's appeals to you, or maybe we're just libertarian, peace punk, hippie red pond scum. In any case, our little movement on behalf of us all is something new. We intend to recapture lost love to build rescue law. So before refusing to help, study history and your future alternatives. Choose your goals for citizen and human well-being first, and then select the means by which a fair, supportive society should help us meet our goals, or at least not ruin them. For your information, I am temporarily returning to my conversation with world citizens beyond the example of my court arguments for enforcing our nuclear non-proliferation treaty and instituting public campaign finance. May I suggest designing your research not into established fields of study and guidance from authorities. Just begin with worry, love, and determination to help, and search a number of relevant arenas for cause of problems, effects worsening them, and implied experiments likely to produce better outcomes we need and desire. Finally, design behavior and law humans should apply to properly care for and protect each other. Be guided also by great and lawful writings we pay mere lip service to. Study history and current events. Note conspiracy and disaster. Imagine far happier effects from very different behavior, and then appeal for democratic new law or proper enforcement of existing law to produce urgently needed safety and quality of human life for most all of us. For 10,000 years, occasional, feeble, fitful efforts to build family love in law into government have, of course, gone nowhere. So merely my listeners' small but continuing efforts, including finding one recruit apiece to help, should come closer to saving us all than anyone ever has before. And in the nick of time, too, because the inexorable pattern was not to reach doomsday in any one of those 100 centuries, but to all indications in the rather early middle of our 101st. So let's get cracking, boys and girls. Now let's return to the American version of every nation's federal court dream trial. Article 1, Section 8 gives Congress the power to lay and collect taxes and borrow money on the credit of the United States. As our bribery and war systems at least double every national budget, doubling everyone's taxes and exploding our present and future debt obligations, conversely, your honor's actions to direct us to lawful world peace and to halt leaders' theft conspiracies with private on public parasites, will rapidly pour many, many trillions toward debt reduction as we choose an efficient public care of citizens we and our honest, ethical representatives will choose. Because your actions will allow us to fire the damn thieves. A clean government of said economy, without vast breaks for favored industries and vast fees against mere powerless citizens forgetting to bribe the capos, will rapidly consider flat taxes, and when matching spending to income, just like your sensible mom and dad did, the balanced budget amendment should sweep through the House, Senate, and all 50 state legislatures, who will not only then pass their own state budget versions, but soon outlaw state and municipal private political gifts also, as virtually every voter reminds them not to further pollute local governments with the destructive evil so dramatically, gloriously removed from our federal government. Any remaining need to borrow money, permitted by our current Constitution, should be specified in any national or state balanced budget amendment as certain catastrophic emergencies only, such as invasions, barely conceivable while we and our inspired friends around the globe continue to destroy offenses. Trillion-dollar meltdowns also would be less and less likely as we phase out nuclear power. The economic sanity built into balanced budget amendments and our critical arms race and bribery reforms still must include overt law that every nickel or trillion owed mandates a prompt repayment schedule before we lose interest. Get it? Like you're losing interest in a certain windbag, right? Your honors, help us stop the corrupt financial bleeding. Then we'll finally secure our constitutional blessings of liberty by stopping the stealing of our earnings and our posterities unto national and personal depression and bankruptcy. Then we'll join with all nations in humane response to exploding existential menace by pounding every mercenary sword into another plowshare of care. Now, you don't imagine that liberty and happiness pink up a bit without poverty, famine, thirst, plagues, and raging war 25,000 miles around, do you? Just a thought. Judges, your rulings against bribery and for our treaty elects an honest, peaceful economic Congress that passes the balanced budget amendment and continues to cement the rights and peace you initially restored. Our Constitution requires our government to provide for our common defense. And don't you dare deny that also all of its other preambles' universal yet fully specific goals of decent human treatment and lives have the intent and force of law. What, they wrote it for fun? For wishy-washy ideals? Nothing required? From 1783 to the Manhattan Project in 1943, huge oceans and our general, if not absolute 100% allergy to imperial colonial subjugation, accepted or inflicted, and neighbors either friendly or competently resisted by a proper domestic military, in total assured our common defense. Then suddenly we invited the world to aim 8,000 6,000-mile-an-hour metropolis blaster roasters at every single state that Article 3, Section 4 requires our government to protect against invasion. Since our world wars, the first pure business and political party-fueled American aggression, our seized freedom to build massive conventional arsenals, has ever since impelled leaders to use them in elective, aggressive war after invasion war, each multiplying a new world of infuriated terrorists plotting to sneak the nuclear evil we spread and sold back into our cities. Now, do you understand the urgency and exact actions required for securing our constitutional common defense before catastrophe, depression, and extinction? While we work at calming the terrorists instead of begging their imitation of and revenge against us, demand that Congress spend the $2 billion needed to harden our computers against electromagnetic pulses before somebody shoots a nuclear missile from a Canadian forest over our heartland, halting our food growing, delivery, and sales long enough to starve 95% of us. Improve that defense a trillionfold by directing us to complete world work for our disarmament treaty we've abrogated for the last half century. Which, by the way, is our only opportunity to reduce to minimal the catastrophic danger of that terrorist weapon being fired up over the American heartland that I described. The legal work that we should do to spread justice, equality, and disarmament, becoming known throughout the Middle East for no longer starting or entering their wars for corrupt, hated governments, nuclear or oil monopoly, or hammering one sect with another, is the only possible course of action to shrink and stay the hands of terrorists all of our making. The power goals of the remaining radicals and rebels would be badly hurt by wrecking the world economy to punish a nation now leading reform for peace and justice. Suppose our leaders mothballed the Tomahawks and F-15s and told the world once a week that enforcement against, not with, weapons was the wave of the future we're handing out surfboards for, and put our money and behavior where our mouth was. No, that wouldn't stop ISIS in 6 months, but if we also advance international conventional weapons reductions, in 6 years, I guarantee you the wind leaves the sails of many venal governments and also violent bigot rebels. We've helped cut off their savagery supply, for starters. Why has the sword always been mightier than the ink pen? Too many swords. And considering the 50 million monthly memos for war strategery and the inexcusable dearth of strong, practical, historical, legal scribblings from us peace nuts, not enough ink pens. You see, that one 15-second summary of his story tells us exactly what to do now. And it ain't rocket science. Once you get going a few years, you judges, you listeners, any last terrorists managing to French fry the epicenter of the world's love bomb would never be popular at parties. He'd have a hard time getting a date. So you see how our Constitution directs us to protect us with love, not hate. You don't suppose there exists a common defense against shooting each other or ourselves, do you? Can you read English? Ever read that few pages called the Constitution? Then you know that the right of the people to keep and bear arms, explicitly stated, is for the arming of military units commanded by the President of the United States, not every single homeowner, everybody who needs a dozen hunting rifles to use occasionally, or white power, black power, or ready for the revolution freaks, the Bloods, the Crips, or NRA. Now, don't get upset. I'm not for prying your cold, dead fingers from your precious shooting iron. Just backing off unlimited manufacture now that every adult, young'un, and rugrat in America already has their own personal murder weapon. Then again, why limit handgun production? We Americans only have barely enough fully loaded to kill 2 billion people. So we need to keep jacking annual sales to boost further the 32,000 yearly wasted souls, hundreds of thousands of wounded, and even more beginning lifetimes of grieving. All those bigger organized wars kill exactly as many as our unlimited, evil, insane planetary weapons production causes. Private and gang killings are no different if you simply track gun population and murders parallel rises all over the world on any graph. But why be scientific when popular propaganda from gun salesmen settles the issue? Gun control is a pure waste of time. Anyone denied the convenience of offing someone in a quick fit of temper with a crook of their finger is just as sure to carve, hammer, or headbutt you to death. Besides, our founders wouldn't expect us to institute structural, legal opposition to an endlessly escalating domestic bloodbath, merely to provide for the common defense, would they? The Government Council has already told you that world mass murder suicide is our right and protection. My argument to stop most murder and suicide at home by a few decades of slow but progressive gun manufacture reductions is a different lawsuit, but remains useful to strengthen our case for following the order of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to remove the killing power of nuclear weapons by removing nuclear weapons. By the same overwhelming toddler logic. No dangerous toys. So we'll see the same government shyster back in court who will insist that easy click-boom murder and suicide is our right too. Though since 90% of home gun killings waste your own family and not any intruder, he might choke on his claim of safety. Our motivation to sue for weapons of mass destruction control and fair elections, other than constitutional imperative and justice, comes from a study of history. Undemocratic tyranny and excess weaponry killed at least 500 million people and ruined the human lives of several billions more. And if you have not read several dispassionate scientific projections of nuclear technology's rocket rise and fall to finish the rest of us quite soon, your public education is less than incomplete. From your decisions for just loving rescue will come decades of merciful changes. Enforcing the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty doesn't include the Conventional Weapon and Army Limits Treaty that will stop the vast majority of current war. But ending bribery elects the caring public servants, including a president, that will negotiate it, and the uncorrupted legislatures to ratify it. Whereas politicians beholden to weapons companies always vote our trillions for a war machine that keeps exploding with its own commercial and emotional impetus, those given equal time to propose modest defensive armies, arms, and attitudes will be elected and will immediately remind the people and all our leaders that the 70-year era of flouting our constitutional law that only Congress declares, that is, authorizes war, and executives claiming that attacks of conquest upon the other side of the earth are really emergency defense that the people and their Congress have no say in, unless to certify executive lies inventing threats to us. The era of Congress just remaining silent during presidential wars, attacking enemies incited by prior presidents' wars. The era of more bombs and fewer infantry cited as license to drag us through decades of war in violation of war choice power historically seized by kings, not presidents of republics. The era of undeclared but every bit as real and deadly wars, 1,000 times as stupid and deadly, for cutting us loving family people out of deciding when killing is necessary and when it is not. Still told to pay and die, of course. With your decisions, that era is over. Not after Congress takes another decade to clean up and realize it, but now, when you force legislators and executives to obey our Constitution. Once the death machine employees are gone, honest leaders' constituents remind them to continue that conventional treaties, years of flexible international negotiations, advancing progressive world weaponry diminishment, and we ever slow down war and risk of bankruptcy and depression and speed up solving real-world emergencies. Choking war's pipelines prevents tens of millions of murders, exactly as increasing stringent gas rationing cuts our endlessly driving down to bare minimal local transportation. War is weapons made for murder, and we're destroying the pair together. 10,000 years ago, men started two horrific traditions. 1. Inviting merchants of death to build limitless arsenals. And 2. Inviting them to bribe leaders to buy them with our money, sparking the chain reaction of wars that killed hundreds of millions, culminating in our all but completed race to Armageddon. Your honors, the latest of decades of invasion wars fought entirely upon presidential initiative and continuation in violation of our Constitution, which reserves all war-starting and fighting power for the people's initial declaration and authorization through a majority of their Senate and House representatives, voting for hostilities against a specific enemy, forces us to sue through you to halt President Obama or his successors from individually launching wars upon Syria, Iraq, Libya, ISIS, or any other nation or militia without specific congressional declarations of war prior to one single illegal executive missile, bomb, or infantry attack. A few of you are old enough to recall over a half-century of expert TV analysis of American war legality, that is, illegality. Noting that our presidents endlessly launch elective, that is, their choice, with no self-defense excuse whatsoever, wars without the constitutionally required Congress of the People, declarations of war. Always further noted is Congress contentedly ignoring its constitutional duty to choose or reject any war proposed by any executive or lawmaker, and everyone ignoring our founders limiting the commander-in-chief to directing troops only Congress is permitted to unleash and fund. How clear is your duty when presidents and Congress destroy the Constitution's peace protection of the people? Are you not the final check and balance, the court of last resort? For 60 years after the World Wars, and repeatedly with 19th century imperial, commercial, military adventures under the bullying concept of manifest destiny, presidents have brazenly said, "Screw our people, Congresses, and the Constitution. I control the soldiers and weapons, so I'll just attack illegally and expect everyone to forget our law and rally around my personal aggressive war." And why does each and every tyrant's gamble work? Because the wimpy people, Congresses, and courts forgot to take our power back. Eventually, unconstitutional executive war-fighting tyranny becomes an accepted tradition, just like universally trashing the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Most of our history and future trend to final Holocaust both instruct you judges to order full, ironclad enforcements of America's original laws of military defense that allow only the people to choose killing, as we always only do when every other sane alternative is gone. Whereas political, commercial, and even pseudo-religious tyrants thrive on, need, and desire, conspire for, and order wars for profit. We, the people, unless robbed of our God and constitutionally given rights, always choose peace, unless infected with bigotry and hate by evil leaders, always choose peace for love and life.